Welcome to Think Tank. I'm Steve Adubato. The program that you're about to see was taped in February of 2020. Clearly, so much has changed since then, and unfortunately, a lot of uncertainty and fear remain. But these Think Tank programs and the issues explored will still matter once we get through these very difficult times together. Most importantly, we hope and pray that you and your family are safe. So without further ado, Think Tank. Welcome to Think Tank. I'm Steve Adubato. It is my honor to introduce for the first time joining us on Think Tank, David Opderbeck, who is professor of law and the co-director of the Gibbons Institute of Law, Science, and Technology at Seton Hall University Law School. Good to see you, David.
Great to be with you, thanks.
Let's have a conversation about hate groups in the country and its connection to social media. Go ahead.
Well, social media is one of the main ways that hate groups propagate their message, and one of the main ways that they recruit new members. It's basically costless, and they can reach a lot of people through it.
How do they do it?
Through advertising, through videos.
Excuse me, what do they advertise? Hey, we're a hate group?
Well, sort of like memes and things like that. So, you know, little pictures with slogans and other sorts of things like that. Political advertisements and videos of some of their activities, books, other things like that.
So I'm curious about this. This institute dedicated, by the way, this connection to the Gibbons Law Firm?
Yes, that's right.
Actually an underwriter of the work we do here at the Caucus Educational Corporation. Question, created because?
The Gibbons Institute?
Yeah.
Was funded by the Gibbons firm more than a decade ago to just kind of promote the study of law, science, and technology at Seton Hall Law School.
What I'm curious about is this subject of online activity, connection to hate groups, cybersecurity. The next logical part of this conversation is the 2020 presidential election and all the talk about, quote unquote, Russian interference again after 2016. First of all, is it real?
It is very real. It's a major problem. I think anybody who seriously looks at the data and the intelligence would have to agree that it is a really significant
How are
thing.
they doing it?
What the Russians
To
are,
us.
Yeah, what they're mostly doing now. So they do some old school hacking in terms of getting into servers and things like that, but their main mode of operation really is disinformation. So again, kind of like the hate groups we were talking about, they're putting memes, they're putting fake advertisements, they're putting...
Are they using Facebook?
They're using Facebook.
To say what?
So they'll put a message about Bernie Sanders that is untrue, or a message about President Trump that is untrue. So they'll have these kind of bumped up claims that really don't reflect reality, but they get people really fired up.
And so then, let's play this out for a second. Someone looks at it and they go, I heard on the news, I heard somewhere about X, and they believe that what they heard, saw, whatever is true. It is disinformation. It is coming from a foreign adversary looking to mess around with our political electoral process. Who's responsible for A, monitoring it, and B, stopping it?
That's a great question. And the short answer is there isn't really a great deal of responsibility. Most of the responsibility is put onto us as the consumers of this media to be aware.
But how do we know?
It's very difficult to know. And I think when you do see something that seems a little bit extreme or maybe a little bit exaggerated, you want to have your sort of radar go up a little bit.
Well, hold on, what about Facebook?
Well,
I saw Zuckerberg, that's it, Mark Zuckerberg, right? Saw him testifying before Congress, saw him testify many times, saw him speak in public. Haven't heard a comprehensive, serious plan to stop this. Or is Facebook simply not responsible?
Well, yeah, they're not responsible for the most part, and that you could view that either as a feature or as a bug of the current system, because there's a federal law in place, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, that gives a publisher like Facebook immunity for content that is posted by their users.
Because? What is the rationale behind that statute?
The rationale is it allows these platforms to grow and to do what they do and to facilitate user interaction without constantly having to face threats of defamation lawsuits or to spend the money to police
Hold on
it.
one second. Here's what I'm confused about. Those of us who are in public broadcasting right now have to live under the rules of not just public broadcasting, but the FCC. There is no FCC for the internet?
That's basically correct. And that is, again, either a feature or a bug, depending on how you look at it. Broadcast radio, broadcast television, and then cable television were all regulated under the presumption that there's kind of limited bandwidth, and you sort of are getting a license from the government, and so the government can sort of extract concessions from you. The internet was initially set up as a regulatory matter to say this is different. It's not like broadcast. It's built from the ground up.
Social media and ancillary digital platforms connected so much to our political discourse that is outdated and antiquated to look at it that way.
I personally would agree with that to some extent. And there are some lawmakers who are looking at ways to kind of limit this Section 230 immunity a little bit, at least with respect to hate speech or election interference. Although there are, many of my colleagues who do work in law and technology feel very strongly that Section 230
Leave it
shouldn't
alone.
be touched.
That's what they say. Go back to the hate group issue. Then who's responsible for monitoring the hate group activity online?
Well, again,
Is it the same answer?
It's the same answer for the most part. If you could say that Facebook had actual knowledge of a specific group inciting a specific, act of violence on a particular occasion, that might be a little
So
different.
hold on a
but that's
second, back
pretty
up.
rare.
Charlottesville.
Yeah.
The crowd that was in Charlottesville, on both sides, not my words, that crowd never would have gathered in that square, marching with tiki torches, with anti-Semitic, racist comments, and then violence be perpetrated if it were not for the social media platforms we're talking about right now.
I think that's a great point, and I'm not going to be obviously an apologist for any of those groups. The pushback would be it's the same First Amendment that applies to us sitting here, that applies to them, and that applies to everybody else.
The First Amendment.
Yeah.
But doesn't the First Amendment also say you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater? Is that comparable or apples and oranges?
I would argue that some of what happened at that Charlottesburg rally certainly went to that kind of incitement of violence as well as actual, obviously, acts of violence. But at the same time, you do have to be careful about cutting back the freedom of speech, because you start to cut it back in one area and it has repercussions in other areas that you haven't really thought about.
But it's a pendulum issue.
I don't know if it's a pendulum issue or a slippery slope or some other term like that.
I just wonder, again, I'm not expressing an opinion, but there are a lot of reasonable folks who would say you can still keep the ability to communicate and engage in meaningful conversation and share ideas in a free and open forum, but do it in a responsible fashion that does not endanger other people, much less our electoral process.
Yeah, I think there should be some legal obligations on these large, basically they're a piece of our infrastructure, as
Sure.
you were noting before, to have an obligation to do some kind of monitoring. But it's difficult to say what that obligation would be and how far it should carry.
Well, I promise you we'll continue the conversation, David. You've added a lot to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Stay right there. We'll be right back right after this.
Think Tank with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Valley Bank, New Jersey Sharing Network, PSE&G, the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey, NJM Insurance Group, the Fidelco Group, the New Jersey Education Association, the Russell Berry Foundation, and by Fedway Associates, Inc. Promotional support provided by NJ.com and by the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.